The man who started with nothing was not born into comfort, privilege, or influence. His life began in the shadows of poverty, in an environment where even the basics were a daily struggle. There were no guiding hands, no legacy businesses, no prestigious last name to lean on. From a young age, he realized that if he was to ever stand tall in a world that rewarded the powerful, he would have to carve his own path through sheer will. What made his journey remarkable was not that he succeeded, but how he built every inch of his life from the ground up, without shortcuts, without advantages, and without certainty. In the beginning, his world was small. He lived in a cramped, one-room dwelling with peeling walls, dim lights, and a leaking ceiling. The air was often thick with despair, but somehow he found space to dream. Every morning, he would wake up before the sun rose and walk miles to do odd jobs, sweeping floors, unloading goods, running errands for people who barely noticed him. He wasn't educated in the traditional sense, and his clothes were worn and patched, but he carried something within that no one could see: hunger. Not for food, but for a better life. That hunger kept him moving forward even when life tried to pull him back. He had no mentors in the beginning. Every lesson came through pain. He was cheated, humiliated, and overlooked more times than he could count. But each failure became a page in his unwritten guidebook. While others gave up, he paid attention. He studied people, he listened, he observed. And slowly, he began to change the way he saw himself. He started reading borrowed books under streetlights. Words became his teachers, stories became his classroom. Bit by bit, he trained his mind to see opportunities instead of obstacles. He didn't let his circumstances define his mindset. He built an internal world where success wasn't a distant dream, but a goal worth chasing, even if it took a lifetime. There were days when it felt like nothing was changing. He worked endlessly, but progress came in fractions. It took him years just to save a little money, enough to start a small street cart selling simple snacks. People laughed at him, some mocked him. But he smiled and served them anyway. He knew that real growth didn't come from applause but from patience. That little cart was more than just a business, it was a statement that he was no longer just surviving, he was building. He learned how to talk to customers, how to handle money, how to manage time. Every single moment became an investment in his future self. As months turned into years, that cart turned into a stall, the stall into a shop, and the shop into a small business. He hired people from the same streets he once walked. He didn't forget where he came from, but he never let it hold him back. He upgraded himself constantly, learning about business, leadership, technology. His reputation grew, not because he was loud, but because he was reliable. His word became his currency. People began to trust him not just as a businessman, but as someone who had earned every inch of his success through honesty and dedication. The man didn't chase luxury, but he didn't fear it either. When he could finally afford a better home, he moved his family out of poverty. His new home wasn't extravagant, but it was safe, clean, and peaceful, a place where his children could study without distractions, where his wife could sleep without worrying about tomorrow. He made sure the walls of that house echoed with laughter, not arguments. And even though he now lived comfortably, he never stopped waking up early. He never stopped learning. He never stopped working. Success didn't make him arrogant, it made him more grounded. He built safety into his life, not just for himself, but for others. He created systems in his business that protected his workers from exploitation. He paid them on time, offered them growth, and treated them with dignity. He believed that real safety wasn't about walls or alarms, but about fairness and empathy. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, and he promised himself he would never make others feel that way. That's why his team stayed loyal, his customers returned, and his community respected him. What made his story unique wasn't the size of his empire or the money in his account. It was the journey. Most people wait for perfect conditions to start. They wait for a loan, a mentor, a guarantee. But he didn't wait. He started with nothing. No safety net, no backup plan. Just a belief that consistent effort, day after day, could move mountains. He wasn't smarter than others. He just refused to quit. He failed more than most people even try. And each time, he stood up stronger, wiser, and more determined. There were sacrifices. He missed celebrations, gave up comfort, and endured loneliness. There were nights he went hungry so his family could eat. There were years where no one clapped for him, no one noticed his efforts. But he kept going. Because deep down, he wasn't chasing applause. He was chasing freedom. The freedom to live on his own terms, to choose his own future, to rewrite the story he was born into. And that freedom, he earned, not in one grand moment, but in thousands of small choices. Eventually, his story reached others. People began to talk about the man who had started with nothing. He was invited to speak, to mentor, to share his journey. But he always kept one thing clear: he wasn't special. He was simply committed. His story wasn't about talent, it was about time, effort, and faith. He used his voice to remind others that even if you're standing at the very bottom, you still have something powerful, the ability to begin. Today, he continues to grow. Not just in wealth, but in impact. He funds schools, supports young entrepreneurs, and builds opportunities where there were once only barriers. He hasn't forgotten the nights of doubt or the days of despair. He carries them with pride, as proof that no matter how dark the beginning, every story can become a beacon for someone else. His journey is a living reminder that you don't need everything to start. You just need the courage to begin, the strength to keep going, and the heart to never give up. Because sometimes, the man who starts with nothing ends up creating something that inspires the world.